Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Challoner. I'm responsible for CDMA radio access within Ericsson. Today I want to talk about some opportunities in CDMA and focus on two specifically. One is the machine-to-machine market, and the other is the 450 megahertz space. We segment the market like this. This is how we see it. Starting at the bottom, North America, that represents about half of the capex globally. So it's important to focus on that. Obviously, the data growth that we've heard about with people like Verizon, with the data growth in Sprint driving them, one of their drivers for their network modernization program, is critical for us to continue to support. Internationally, the difference there, I think, is a lot of the operators in the international space have later access or later plans for LTE, so their CDMA spending is continuing and because of some of their spectrum issues that they have. The third segment, there's around about 130 operators operating in the 450 megahertz space in 60 different countries. And I think that's a particularly interesting space, and I'll talk about one of those operators, Net1 in Scandinavia, a little bit later. And the last one, the machine-to-machine space, and Ericsson is a big proponent of this space and talks about belief in 50 billion connected devices by the year 2020. So that's all devices, all technologies except RFID, and represents a belief that that is something that we really need to focus on as a market, and specifically in CDMA. So where do we put our investments, or where should the industry put their investments? Capacity growth. So we heard a lot about the data explosion, we heard about the tsunami. I like to think of it in exabytes. So exabytes 10 to the 18th bytes. In 2008, it was the first year we got past 1 exabyte globally. I think in 2014 we'll be at 18 exabytes globally. So if you think that if you put every word spoken by a human being down and write it down in a file, that will be around about 5 exabytes. So it just gives you a kind of context of the size and scale of that. So there's a term coined to talking about this as the exa flood. So managing this exa flood as opposed to tsunami is something that the industry needs to worry about. And how do we do that? Well, on the data side, we manage the peak rate. So we talked about RevB taking you from 9.3 up to 14.7 megabits per second. That's an important piece. DO Advanced, which with a software upgrade gives you potential doubling of capacity in the network with just a software change. And then the 1X Advanced, which is a spectral efficiency mechanism for voice, but also has the benefit that gives you, that will free up carriers, voice carriers, that you can put in, you can replace with DO data carriers, or indeed LTE carriers. So a lower voice mechanism, it allows also for addition of DO and LTE. And the third point is, when you're worrying about data, there are different bottlenecks in the network. And one of those is the backhaul from the base station. And there's a lot of TDM, T1s out there that you need to manage. So changing those to IP, changing the TDM out for IP throughout the network is a good way of removing that bottleneck, which will help improve performance of data. Modernization, specifically for LTE. So what do you need to do that? You need a base station that can handle both the CDMA technology and the LTE technology, so multi-standard. And you need that base station to work in multiple frequencies, depending on the spectrum allocation you have. So multi-standard, multi-band base station. You also need the effective handover between the two technologies. So LTE will roll out starting in the urban areas. If you're on a VoIP call or if you're on a streaming video and you fall out of LTE coverage, you want to seamlessly move on to CDMA coverage. So the EHRPD functionality is critical to maintain that. And then as you add LTE, you need to change the core network. So you add the evolved packet core for LTE, you need to be able to do that in a seamless way. So they're the three elements of the technology needed to take you to LTE. And then in the market space, addressing the rural market and the 450, which I'm going to talk about in a second, and then the machine-to-machine market, and what do we need to do in terms of the network to serve those market segments more efficiently. Talking a bit more about the 450 space now. So this is the spectrum that was allocated, used to be an analog spectrum, moved to digital spectrum and is being used for CDMA around the world in 130 operators. This is a case study of a particular operator in Scandinavia, operating in some of the Scandinavian countries. It's called Net1. And they have an approach where they do data only. So they don't offer a circuit voice solution. And that has the advantage of simplifying the network significantly. And they can still offer VoIP over the top of their network. And this is how they see the market, and I think we would agree with that. On the left-hand side, the consumer space, and their particular segment is they're treating roaming mobile data customers from moving, in the Swedish example, from Stockholm, moving to their summer houses, requiring mobile data in a rural environment. Now, 450 is great for this because of the coverage advantage. The low frequency, allowing great propagation, much more effective, so three times fewer base stations than a 900 megahertz solution, for example. And that allows you to address low subscriber density cost effectively. On the business side, of course, those same subscribers want to do work, they want to get their emails, they want to do some of the more of the heavy lifting. So the interesting point here is, when you think of rural subscribers, you shouldn't think of them as being less sophisticated or less demanding than an urban subscriber. It's just because there are urban subscribers moving in this context to their summer houses. So the expectation on the network is high. Also, public safety. So a comment mainly for Europe is there's a lot of services in Europe that deliver voice for emergency services, so systems like Tetra, for example, but they don't do data well. And so one of the concepts here, and one of the usage of 450, is to use that as a data overlay and provide that for video services and fingerprint checking and picture checking, etc., for the police services. So that's something that Net1 are interested in. And then the last point is they have a partnership with a power company, and even though it's a rural market, they have a significant number of installations where they work with the power company to aggregate utility reading, electricity meter reading applications into a central system. So they really cover the waterfront, and I think they do a nice job of illustrating the versatility of the 450 megahertz spectrum and the very effective business model they have. Low startup costs, low cost infrastructure, addressing and allowing you to get to the low subscriber density in that particular market. So they will also incidentally be launching RevB services shortly.